Thank you. First of all, I want to say I'm really glad to be here, and I want to thank Catalyst Creative for inviting me. So to start off, I'll start off with a story, and then I'll talk about the takeaways from the story and move into more detail. So the story kind of starts with how I kind of started my career working mainly at technology companies. So as she mentioned, I worked in payments, I worked in machine learning, and I worked kind of in the tech sector generally. And as I worked at startups, I started to get into that mindset and understand how startups think, how they are quick to move, how they challenge assumptions, how they learn every day, and how they, instead of reasoning by analogy, they reason from like core basic axioms, which is how you think of when you're doing mathematical research or physics research. And so that completely changes your mindset and your decision-making process. And after working on a lot of technology companies, I thought it would be a really good experience to look at it from the investing standpoint. You know, how do I invest in technology companies now that I've worked at tech companies? And that was a very interesting experience. And throughout the pipeline, if you think of technology companies from the really early stage companies that you're investing in a seed round to the public companies where you're trading in the larger businesses, there's obviously the investment process and the thought process behind it is very different. And what I really enjoyed doing there was just meeting these entrepreneurs and meeting these companies and learning about how they started, how their business model evolved, what challenges they faced. And one thing I always like doing this is asking companies, okay, so how would you rank your challenges and name your top 3? And when you work with these companies, it was very surprising for me, but even across the board from like the early stage entrepreneur to like a larger company, a few things came up pretty much across the board. And it was technology and hiring. And when they said hiring, it was hiring tech talent, which kind of is technology. So that was something I was kind of, it's something you'd expect because technology is growing. But as I did more research into it, I realized that it was mainly a function of technology is touching every industry. And there are very few companies today that can say that there is zero tech in the business, meaning, obviously everyone uses email, but like even beyond just email, a web presence, a mobile presence, some sort of software to improve the way they operate internally. And even now, companies that are non-obviously technology, where what they service, the way they serve their customer might be like either like a real estate company or a hotel or any type of business, they still have software incorporated in the way they interact with their customer through social media or whatever it may be. And so that was really interesting. And I caught up with a good friend of mine and realized that he had a very similar kind of vision for how technology was going to grow and had recognized that same problem, that tech talent or the needs for technology were growing so fast that it would be very hard for that supply to catch up unless something intelligent would be done. And it's a tough problem to solve, and there are many different ways you can think about solving it. And so he said, okay, let's experiment, and let's see what we can do. Let's just start off with working with a few companies and providing for them development services. So when they say, I need tech help, what does that mean? And we will do that for you. And we just started working with a few friends and doing that, kind of like a services thing. We'd help you and figure it out. And we saw a lot of things that, a lot of the challenges as we worked with different companies. Okay, like how do you communicate? How do you work together? How do you build technology? And how do you build technology when you're basically helping seeing what other people's vision is? What are they looking to build? And how do I understand that? And so we started doing that for a bit, and it was great. But then quickly what happens is you start getting a lot more demand than you can serve. And we were like, okay, this company has many needs. They have web development needs, mobile, data science, security. Now there's Internet of Things, embedded systems, wearable technology, and every day there's a new thing. So how can we be the best in every single thing? Virtual reality is coming up, and tomorrow there's going to be something new. So what we said, okay, whenever there's a request that comes in that we don't know how to serve, let's see if we can find someone that can help them, and we'll connect them. And so security requests came in, and they wanted an expert security specialist. And we weren't expert security specialists. And we were also kind of already doing more work than we could serve. So we said, let's find for them a great security specialist that's going to help them think through protecting their data. And this is especially relevant for companies that hold and manage data that is highly sensitive, right? Like a recruiting firm would not be happy if a recruiting software company would not be happy if all their data about all the recruitment data would be hacked. Because then imagine if you're a company and you have all this internal communication about everyone you're hiring, right? You're interviewing them. Sometimes you crack jokes with other employees about an interview, which may be a little inappropriate. And if that goes public, that's very bad. Not only to the person you interviewed, for the way like there's a lot of things that you just don't want out there when it comes to things that you think are very personal. Of course, email and things like that. So when you think about that, security is very sensitive and very important. And if you were to look at the priorities within technology, security is usually very high, especially for companies that manage sensitive data, which today a lot of companies do. And so we said, okay, let's try to find the best guys. So we started searching and looking for the best guys, and we found that it's actually hard to find really good people. And the reason is that there's a lot of people that kind of play with security and kind of do some work in security, but how do I find the best people for this specific need? And so we started doing more research on it, and we did calls with a bunch of people, and we realized that this was not easy. And we found a few people and started referring them work and doing in different verticals. Internet of Things and Google Glass was popular at the time. Was starting to kind of grow, and people were thinking, how do I integrate with Google Glass or Internet of Things? And so we started building these partners, and then more and more requests came in. And we said, okay, how do we do this intelligently? How do we build partnerships? Because this is a really interesting opportunity to like figure this out. And what we did was we basically would travel all around the US and then globally and meet with these development teams and learn about the local cities. What's the education like? What technologies are you being taught in school? What's the culture like? How well do they communicate? Most of the companies we work with are in the US. Can they speak English fluently if this is outside of the US? If they're in the US, okay, we'll learn more about what types of technologies do you enjoy working on? What types of industries do you like to work on? Do you understand the regulation around these specific industries when it comes to technology, especially in healthcare, in finance, where there's all this regulation? So we started to meet all these companies, and it was amazing when you get to these cities and you get to learn about how they've evolved, how education has evolved in these countries, and how they think about building software. And we found that there's a lot, it's just amazing how much brilliant talent there is all over the world, even in areas you would never have expected. YouTube is what empowers a lot of education in areas that you wouldn't expect. They're just very patient people who don't have amazing internet, but they have internet, and they wait for these YouTube videos to load, and they learn. And I would just meet these people. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. You live in an area where you have very limited resources, but you are so passionate about what you're doing that you learn. And this is kind of what we did. We just vetted development teams, and we said, company needs XYZ need. We're going to connect you to it. These people are vetted, and we're going to guide you into how to engage with those teams. Because engaging with development teams, even if you're sitting in New York City and they're in New Jersey, how do you work in that remote relationship? How do you think about remote work? And that was a trend we saw. So that was really interesting. And so what we started doing was, that became our business. And it was called VenturePact because we wanted partnerships to take place instead of short-term relationships between these companies. And it was extremely exciting for us to do that. Now, that's kind of the core part of the story that I wanted to tell. And the two main takeaways from that story are, first, that you can see how business models evolve, right? We started off getting paid for services, then we went into kind of this marketplace concept, and so that's interesting. And the second thing that's really kind of interesting is how these marketplaces evolve and how they're structured. So basically, in the past, there was no mechanism by which companies who needed tech talent, right, if they were going to hire them full-time, they'd work with a recruiting agency. If they didn't want to hire them full-time, they would basically just search and kind of try to figure it out on their own without a good mechanism for vetting. And the only companies that had access to this were the biggest 100 companies because they would basically hire full-time people, big companies, consultancies, pay really hefty fees to get this advice. And that model, that brokerage kind of agency model where they give that advice, right, is only profitable at those big company levels. So basically most of the companies in the world do not have access to that. But what we did was we said, wait, we can use software to provide people with access to that information. And so that they don't need that model that used to exist no longer has to be like that. And so the traditional, what I want to talk to you all about is how brokerage, gatekeepers, or that traditional model of intermediaries is evolving. And so the first example is travel agencies. So travel agencies used to be super fundamental, right? You needed a travel agency to travel because you didn't have Expedia, you didn't have Orbitz. And they're really important to you. And what they gave you was they gave you access to information. They give you access to which airlines are flying, when are they flying, what's their prices, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What technology did was they realized that, oh, what we can do, Expedia.com, is be a marketplace. The data that you need, we can get for you around when these airlines are flying, what's the price, and we can give you a really nice interface to choose. And travel agencies, the intermediary, got disrupted in a very fundamental way. So Expedia, the new intermediary, the new way it's structured, is very, very different from traditional travel agencies. Hotels.com was connecting you with hotels in a very different way from the traditional travel agency would work. And what's interesting is that people, when they think of marketplaces, they think of this one layer of intermediary that's getting removed. But if you think about what Hotels.com did was, okay, it's like, okay, we're in the middle between the person who needs a hotel and the people who can provide the hotel, which is the hotel itself. But what the hotel itself is doing is it's getting all the space. And they're basically renting out or buying out the space and giving you access to that space. And so if you think about the next layer of disruption of that secondary intermediary was Airbnb, which said that we're going to leverage excess capacity. What do people already have? They already have extra space in their apartments. Why don't we leverage that space and provide people with access to that space? Because we have the internet. We can connect people directly to that space. And we save on a lot of the upfront fixed costs of a hotel. And so that was a really interesting model to do that second layer of connection. And this is kind of, that marketplace concept is really interesting. And of course, you have to think about, well, there's a difference between a hotel and Airbnb, and they're not equivalent. Whereas in the travel agency model, where you're taking just flights, the experience is pretty similar. If you're just kind of booking simple flights, you can just go on and get the data much faster. And it's actually a lot more convenient, right? Isn't it more convenient for you whenever you want to go on and search on your phone, right? When I need to fly these dates, instead of having to only work within the hours of the travel agency, speak to someone, wait for someone to answer the phone. That's less convenient. And oh, by the way, it's a lot more expensive, right? Because that travel agency has retail outlets. They have people that they're hiring full-time to take these calls. It's a very expensive model. So they're going to have to take a larger fee. And it's less convenient. So it just doesn't make sense anymore. So that's travel agencies. And there's a lot I can talk about on travel agencies. Happy to answer questions on that. Investors. So if you think about an investor, what does an investor do? An investor basically goes and raises money, usually from what is called a limited partner. And those limited partners are either large endowment funds, pension funds, high net worth individuals. They'll take those people's money, right? And then they meet all these companies and they choose who to give money to. So they're an intermediary. And that process was basically, they're the gatekeeper. If you don't get funding from these investors, you're basically not going to be able to continue your business. And that was the traditional model. Now, what's amazing about Kickstarter is it said you no longer have to get these gatekeepers excited about your business. Get your customers excited about your business. They're your end user. If they love what you're doing, they will fund you. And that's amazing. Suddenly, someone who might not be the best salesman, Someone who might not have the right connections with the right investors can now, do whatever project they want to do. If they want to run their health and wellness thing, they can do it. If they want to, make a movie, they can do that. As long as they're able to get their customers excited about it, the customers can pre-fund their vision. And that's changing the investing landscape in a very interesting way, from Kickstarter to Indiegogo, which is with products, and then from AngelList, which is through equity funding, and now the new policy with the Jobs Act, which allows for equity crowdfunding in such a way that I can micro-invest in companies. And that's amazing, because in the past, you'd have to be an accredited investor to invest in companies. But now you can invest as any individual can invest. There's constraints and everything, but that's super powerful. IT sourcing, again, as I mentioned, that's what we're trying to change, the way people source technology and build technology. And we think that if we can make it a lot more convenient for you to build technology, giving you direct access to the best talent, then people are going to be able to better serve their customers, to operate much more efficiently as a business, remove redundancies, empower every employee to be more productive. That's super powerful. And you just look at a lot of companies, there's divisions that are in the company that are doing things and are frustrated with their work because they're doing a lot of redundancy. There's a lot of redundancy in what they're doing. So if you have easy access to the technology and the talent necessary, and you understand how to engage with that talent, you can change that whole dynamic. And companies are going to have access to what they originally didn't have access to. And yeah, there's a big challenge. And the big challenge is working remotely. But if you're working remotely, by the way, just means that you're not in the same office. So I could be in New York, in Midtown, and you can be in the financial district, and that would be considered working remotely because we're not in the same office. But in any case, if you understand how to work remotely, then you can access a lot of talent all over the world and all around the US, instead of just limiting yourself to a small area. And so that's also changing the dynamics of the IT sourcing industry. So brokers and gatekeepers in general. So I guess anyone have any other brokers and gatekeeper examples that are changing? Any industries that are changing as a result of middlemen being this new middleman? In the past, it was all these big like a travel agency, and now it's Expedia. Anyone have other examples?
Like law firms and online legal form companies.
Yeah, right. So there's companies like Priori Legal and Lawdingo that will connect you with the best lawyers. And so you don't need those really big law firms that are very expensive for most businesses. And so that's being disrupted. Taxi dispatching, right? You used to have a taxi dispatching industry. They'd buy medallions, tons of money. In New York, it's like $1 million for a medallion. And they would then lease out that medallion to drivers. Those drivers would then have to pay a lot of money every day for that medallion. And the taxi dispatching industry would give you access to your rides. Zipcar then came along, and you got access to cars. Uber came along and gave you access to drivers who don't have medallions, but they're just in their car. With UberX, you just have people who are originally just riding their car. And then the next layer of innovation on top of that is Uber Pool, where I could be going from downtown Vegas to the Strip, and on that route there's someone else who's going also to the Strip, and we can share our ride. And so you can see how costs change, but the market is kind of evolving such that traditional intermediaries are no longer the way to kind of go about it. So that's the past. Okay, so let's think about the future. And in the future, there's a lot of interesting things that are happening with gatekeepers. And what it does, it's empowering people. So let's look at a couple of interesting examples here. Hollywood, record labels, with music industry, movie industry. Let's look at the media industry traditionally. What usually happened there was, for you to become a great actor, you needed these gatekeepers to approve. For you to become a great, to have your blog post featured in one of these big journals or to be on the news, you'd have these gatekeepers needing to approve that you're going to be on this TV show. For you to be a musician, you needed the record label to say you're a great musician. For you to write great books, you need a publishing firm to say you are good. These publishing firms are deciding, they're the gatekeepers. But today, that's no longer the thing, or at least moving forward, and today it's already starting to happen, that's no longer the case. Amazon, you can self-publish. With YouTube, you can self-publish your own videos. With Kickstarter, you can make your own videos and fund the video projects and you can get access to your customers. They're the ones who are deciding. Same for music. You have SoundCloud, you have iTunes, you can sell your own music. And so these traditional gatekeepers are no longer, these industries are just changing in dramatic ways. And so what people always ask is like, well, how do these existing businesses operate in this new world? How do they adapt? And really, it's about adding more services. And that's the key. It's like, how do I add more services on top of the traditional things? So like investors, they'll add more services, such as Andreessen Horowitz's model, which is instead of just, oh, we're going to give you money, right? That's no longer our distinguishing factor. We're going to give you services on top of our investment, board advising, strategy, recruiting, et cetera, to help you with your beyond just the investment. And so those services is what's distinguishing companies from the traditional just, oh, I'm giving you money. That's a quick overview on my thoughts on the industry. Happy to answer questions, but hope this was helpful. Thank you.